Imagine a man frozen in time, not as a figure of speech, but in literal fact, entombed within a block of ancient, blue-green ice. For 3 years, he remained perfectly preserved, a silent statue in a frozen cathedral, his final moments captured and held by the crushing cold of the Alaskan wilderness. When the ice finally relinquished its grip, it did not reveal a story of a tragic accident or a man who succumbed to the elements. It revealed something far more disturbing. It revealed a murder. The man was Michael Thorne, 47 years old, a civil engineer from Anchorage with a lifelong passion for the outdoors. He was not a novice adventurer or a tourist chasing a thrill. He was a seasoned hunter, a meticulous planner who respected the formidable power of the Alaskan backcountry. His friends and family described him as cautious and competent, a man who knew the risks and prepared for them exhaustively. He had spent decades exploring the state's vast wilderness, and his disappearance was, for those who knew him, completely out of character. The central paradox of Michael Thorne's case haunted investigators for years. How could a man so experienced, so prepared, vanish without a single trace during a routine hunting trip? And more importantly, how did he end up miles from his last known location, frozen solid inside a glacier, with a secret locked away in his perfectly preserved remains? The answer would prove to be as cold and as brutal as the ice that had served as his tomb. The plan had been simple, one Michael had executed in various forms a dozen times before. It was early October, and he was heading into the Chugach Mountains for a 5-day solo moose hunt. It was a ritual for him, a way to disconnect from the structured world of blueprints and deadlines and reconnect with the raw, untamed rhythm of nature. He loved the solitude, the crisp autumn air, and the profound challenge of tracking game in a landscape that was both beautiful and utterly indifferent to human survival. He had packed with his usual precision. His gear included a high-powered .300 Winchester Magnum rifle, a state-of-the-art GPS unit, a satellite phone for emergencies, and enough dehydrated food for 10 days, just in case. His pack was heavy, but every item had a purpose. He laid out his route on a topographic map for his wife, Sarah, marking his intended base camp and the general area he planned to hunt. He promised to be back in Anchorage by the following Sunday evening at the latest. The last time Sarah spoke to him was on a Tuesday morning. He had called from the edge of cell service, near the small town of Girdwood, to say he was about to park his truck and head into the wilderness. He told her he loved her and that he was excited for the trip. His voice was full of the calm anticipation she knew so well. It was a routine call, comforting in its normalcy, and she had no reason to believe it would be their last. The environment Michael Thorne walked into was one of primordial grandeur and unforgiving reality. The Chugach National Forest is a sprawling expanse of jagged peaks, dense spruce forests, and sweeping valleys carved by ancient glaciers. It is a place where the weather can turn in an instant, where a sunny afternoon can dissolve into a blinding blizzard with terrifying speed. In early October, the landscape is in transition, caught between the golden hues of autumn and the stark white of the coming winter. This beautiful but volatile setting would soon become the central character in the mystery of his disappearance. Sunday evening came and went. Michael did not return. Sarah Thorne initially contained her rising anxiety with rational explanations. Perhaps he had been successful early in his hunt and was delayed in packing out the meat. Maybe a stream had swollen with rain, forcing him to find another crossing. She told herself that Michael was resourceful. He knew what he was doing. But as Sunday night bled into Monday morning, the knot of fear in her stomach tightened into a hard certainty that something was wrong. By Monday noon, she could wait no longer. She contacted the Alaska State Troopers and officially reported her husband missing. The news was immediately taken with the seriousness it deserved. A missing hunter in the Chugach in October was a high-priority emergency. The window for a successful rescue in the face of falling temperatures and unpredictable weather was perilously small. Concern quickly escalated into a full-blown search operation. The search for Michael Thorne began with a sense of urgent, disciplined purpose. The Alaska State Troopers coordinated the effort, deploying a helicopter to scour the area from the air. They focused their initial grid search around the location where Michael had told Sarah he would park his Ford F-150 truck, a remote trailhead at the end of a long gravel road. The helicopter pilots, experienced in mountain rescue, flew low over the dense forests and open tundra, their eyes scanning for any sign of human presence. A brightly colored tent, a flash of gear, a signal fire. Simultaneously, ground teams were being assembled. These teams were composed of state troopers, volunteer search and rescue personnel, and local outdoorsmen who knew the terrain intimately. They were hardy, experienced people, accustomed to the harsh demands of the Alaskan wilderness. They began their work at the trailhead, fanning out in organized patterns, their progress slow and methodical as they navigated the thick brush, steep inclines, and treacherous creek beds. They called out his name, their voices swallowed by the immense, silent landscape. But the wilderness was not cooperating. As the search entered its second day, the weather system that had been lurking over the Gulf of Alaska finally moved inland. A massive, early-season snowstorm descended upon the Chugach Mountains, blanketing the entire region in a thick, heavy layer of white. The temperature plummeted, and fierce winds whipped through the mountain passes, creating whiteout conditions that made aviation impossible. The helicopters were grounded, their rotors silent under a growing shroud of snow. The storm rendered the search operation almost entirely ineffective. The ground crews were forced to pull back to lower elevations, their efforts hampered by deep, drifting snow and the very real danger of avalanches. Every potential clue, a footprint, a dropped piece of equipment, a broken branch, was now buried under feet of fresh powder. The vast landscape that Michael had entered was now a uniform, featureless expanse of white. The search had been stopped cold, not by a lack of will, but by the overwhelming force of nature itself. Initial theories about Michael's fate centered on the most logical and tragic of possibilities. The prevailing assumption was that he had been caught off guard by the sudden and violent storm. Perhaps he had suffered an injury, a fall that resulted in a broken leg, leaving him incapacitated and exposed to the elements. Or maybe he had become disoriented in the blizzard, lost his way, and ultimately succumbed to hypothermia. These were common and heartbreaking scenarios in the Alaskan backcountry. Investigators also briefly considered the possibility that he had chosen to disappear. They checked his financial records and found no unusual activity. His bank accounts were untouched, his credit cards unused. He had a stable job, a happy marriage, and deep roots in his community. Friends and family were adamant that he would never voluntarily walk away from his life. The evidence, or lack thereof, quickly ruled out this theory, leaving only the grim specter of a wilderness accident. After 5 days, the storm finally broke, and the search resumed with renewed desperation. But the landscape had been transformed. The fresh snow made movement difficult and concealed everything. Despite the tireless efforts of dozens of searchers over the next 2 weeks, not a single trace of Michael Thorne was found. There was no sign of his camp, no piece of his gear, no indication of his path. It was as if the mountains had simply swallowed him whole. Reluctantly, with winter setting in for good, the active search was officially suspended, leaving his family with a void of unanswered questions and unbearable grief. The following spring, as the heavy winter snowpack began its slow retreat, a glimmer of hope emerged. A pair of hikers, exploring a remote valley several miles from the main trailhead, stumbled upon a discovery. It was Michael Thorne's truck. The Ford F-150 was parked neatly on a small overgrown turnout, partially concealed by alder bushes. The discovery was a shock, as the location was not on the route Michael had described to his wife, nor was it in the primary area covered by the initial search. Forensic investigators from the state troopers were flown to the scene. They found the truck locked. Inside, on the passenger seat, was Michael's wallet, containing his identification and credit cards. A spare jacket and a half-empty thermos of coffee were also present. Crucially, however, his rifle, his main backpack containing his survival gear, and his satellite phone were all missing. The scene was puzzling. The truck showed no signs of a struggle or forced entry. It simply looked as though its owner had parked it, gathered his essential gear, and walked away into the forest. The discovery of the truck reignited the investigation. Hope, which had faded over the long, dark winter, surged back through the Thorne family. The search was relaunched, now focused intensely on the area surrounding the abandoned vehicle. Canine units were brought in, their sensitive noses combing the ground for any trace of human scent. Helicopters once again crisscrossed the skies above the dense forest. Volunteers returned, pushing deeper into the unforgiving terrain, determined to bring Michael home. Yet, this new, intensified search yielded the same frustrating result as the first: nothing. The dogs found no discernible trail leading away from the truck. The ground searchers found no discarded gear, no makeshift shelter, no sign of a campsite. The area was a labyrinth of thick woods and steep ravines, and despite covering dozens of square miles, the teams found absolutely nothing. The discovery that had promised answers only deepened the mystery. Why had he parked his truck in such an obscure location? And where could he have possibly gone from there? As the second summer of searching drew to a close with no further clues, a profound and heavy sense of despair settled over the case. The hope that had been so cruelly rekindled was extinguished. The search was officially called off for good. Michael Thorne's case was reclassified from an active rescue to a cold case file. He was now officially listed as a missing person, presumed deceased. For Sarah Thorne and her family, this bureaucratic change was a devastating blow, removing the last vestige of institutional hope and leaving them to face an indefinite future of grief and uncertainty. 3 years passed. The snows of 3 harsh Alaskan winters fell upon the Chugach Mountains, and the thaws of 3 brief, brilliant summers followed. Michael Thorne's story faded from the headlines, becoming a somber piece of local lore, another tragic tale of a capable outdoorsman claimed by the unforgiving wilderness. For the Alaska State Troopers, his file remained open but inactive, one of many unsolved cases filed away in a cabinet, waiting for a break that seemed increasingly unlikely to ever come. For his family, the passage of time did little to heal the wound of not knowing. The break in the case came not from a police investigation, but from the slow, inexorable march of climate change and the chance discovery of 2 complete strangers. In late August, 2 geologists conducting a survey for a mining company were working in a remote, high-altitude section of the Chugach Range. They were mapping rock formations near the terminus of a receding glacier, an area rarely visited by humans. The summer had been unusually warm, and the ancient ice had melted back farther than it had in recorded history, exposing land that had been covered for centuries. As they traversed the newly exposed terrain of rock and glacial moraine, one of the geologists noticed something unusual. It was a patch of dark color embedded within the translucent blue ice at the glacier's edge. From a distance, it looked like a frozen log or a large animal. But as they cautiously approached, their scientific curiosity turned to disbelief, and then to horror. Encased in the ice, perfectly preserved, was the body of a man. He was lying on his side, his knees slightly bent, as if he had been gently laid to rest. He was fully dressed in high-quality hunting gear, the fabric of his camouflage jacket still vibrant. A thick, reddish-brown beard covered the lower half of his face, and his eyes were closed. The frigid temperatures had prevented any significant decomposition. His skin was pale and waxy, but his features were clear, frozen in an expression of serene repose. The geologists knew immediately that they had found someone who had been missing for a very long time. They backed away slowly and used their satellite phone to contact the authorities. It was him. It was Michael Thorne. The location of the discovery was profoundly bizarre. The glacier was over 15 miles, as the crow flies, from where Michael's truck had been found. To have reached that spot on foot would have required a multi-day trek over some of the most treacherous and difficult terrain in the entire mountain range. It was a journey that made no logical sense for a hunter, especially in the face of an impending storm. Why would he have abandoned his planned hunting area and traveled so far into this desolate, high-altitude landscape? The recovery of Michael Thorne's body was a delicate and complex operation. A team of state troopers and a forensic anthropologist were flown to the remote site. They spent hours carefully chipping and melting the ice around the body, working with the precision of archaeologists excavating a priceless relic. Once freed, his remains were airlifted to the state medical examiner's office in Anchorage. The initial assumption, held by everyone involved, was that the autopsy would confirm the long-held theory of a tragic accident. They expected to find evidence of a fall, or perhaps no clear cause of death at all, pointing towards hypothermia. The autopsy began the following morning. The medical examiner, a veteran of countless complex cases, proceeded with methodical care. The body was x-rayed before the internal examination began. It was during this initial scan that the first shocking piece of evidence emerged. The X-ray revealed a small, dense, metallic object lodged in the posterior of the skull. The long-held narrative of a wilderness accident, of a man versus nature, evaporated in an instant. A closer physical examination confirmed the finding. Hidden beneath Michael's thick, matted hair at the base of his skull was a small, neat puncture wound. The medical examiner carefully extracted the object. It was a deformed .22 caliber bullet. Michael Thorne had not gotten lost. He had not fallen. He had not frozen to death in a tragic accident. He was murdered. He had been shot, execution style, from behind. This forensic breakthrough transformed the entire nature of the case. It was no longer a tragic story of a missing hunter. It was a homicide investigation. The perfect preservation of the body, which had been a source of morbid fascination, now became the case's greatest asset. The ice had not only kept Michael's body intact, but it had also perfectly preserved the evidence of the crime. The bullet, the wound, and even microscopic fibers on his clothing were all available for modern forensic analysis. The case file was officially reclassified, and a team of detectives with the Alaska Bureau of Investigation took over. The detectives began with a fundamental question: who would want to kill Michael Thorne? They found no one. He had no known enemies, no business deals gone wrong, no criminal associations. He was, by all accounts, a decent, well-liked family man. The motive did not seem to stem from his life in Anchorage. Therefore, the killer had to be someone he encountered in the wilderness. The investigation pivoted away from his personal life and focused intensely on the remote corner of the Chugach Mountains where his truck and his body were found. Detectives pulled old property records, maps, and flight surveys of the region. They were looking for anyone living in the vast, sparsely populated area between the truck's location and the glacier. Their search led them to a handful of off-grid cabins and old mining claims, most of them long abandoned. But one name stood out. It was Elias Vance, a man in his late 60s who owned a small, isolated parcel of land deep in the mountains, not far from where Michael's truck had been discovered. Elias Vance was a reclusive figure, a name known to local law enforcement, but largely a mystery. He had moved to Alaska decades earlier, seeking to escape society. He had a record of minor offenses from years past, charges of threatening hikers who had strayed too close to his property, and a citation for illegally damming a stream. He was known to be intensely territorial, deeply paranoid, and hostile towards outsiders, whom he often referred to as government agents or trespassers. He fit the profile of a hidden monster, a man capable of committing a senseless act of violence in the isolation of the wilderness. He immediately became their primary suspect. After weeks of careful planning and evidence gathering, investigators secured a search warrant for Elias Vance's property. On a cold, gray morning, a team of state troopers, led by the lead detectives, made the long journey to his remote cabin. They traveled the last few miles on foot, moving silently through the dense woods. The property, when they reached it, was exactly what they had expected. It was a dilapidated, hand-built log cabin, surrounded by a chaotic yard filled with rusting equipment, animal traps, and piles of junk. No trespassing signs, some riddled with bullet holes, were nailed to the trees. Elias Vance was home. The old man was wiry and gaunt, with a long, unkempt gray beard and eyes that burned with suspicion and hostility. He offered no physical resistance as the troopers presented him with a warrant and secured the property. The detectives began their search of the squalid, cluttered cabin. It was dark inside, smelling of wood smoke and old grease, and there, mounted prominently over the stone fireplace, was a .300 Winchester Magnum rifle. A quick check of the serial number confirmed it. It was Michael Thorne's. The discovery of the rifle was the critical piece of evidence they needed, but it was not all they found. Tucked away in a dusty wooden crate beneath Vance's bed, they uncovered more of Michael's stolen property. There was a pair of expensive binoculars, a high-end digital camera, and the GPS unit Michael had packed for his trip. It was a collection of trophies, items the killer had kept from his victim. The search also turned up a small, single-shot .22 caliber rifle, a weapon consistent with the bullet found in Michael's skull. Faced with this irrefutable evidence, Elias Vance was arrested and transported back to Anchorage for interrogation. At first, Vance was silent and defiant. He sat in the stark interrogation room, glaring at the detectives with undisguised contempt. But as they methodically laid out the evidence before him, photographs of the rifle mounted in his cabin, the GPS unit with his fingerprints on it, the ballistics report that would surely link his band, .22, to the murder, his wall of silence began to crack. Over the course of several hours, in a flat, cold, monotone, devoid of any remorse, he confessed. He told them what happened. His story was one of chilling and banal evil. Vance had seen Michael's truck park near what he considered his territory. He viewed this as a personal intrusion, a violation of his isolated domain. He began tracking Michael, watching him from a distance for more than a day, his paranoia and resentment growing with every hour. On the second day, as the snow began to fall, he decided to confront the intruder. He found Michael at his camp, preparing to hunker down for the storm. According to Vance, Michael had been friendly and respectful. He had no idea he was in any danger. Vance, armed with his small rifle, accused him of being a government surveyor or a spy sent to evict him from his land. Michael tried to calm the erratic old man, explaining he was just a hunter and meant no harm. He offered to pack up his camp and leave immediately. As Michael turned his back to start gathering his gear, Vance raised his .22 rifle and shot him once in the back of the head. The motive was as senseless as it was tragic. There was no argument, no robbery, no pre-existing feud. It was an execution fueled entirely by Elias Vance's profound paranoia and his twisted, proprietary rage. After the murder, with a blizzard now raging, Vance used a small sled to drag Michael's body for miles across the rugged terrain. He took him to the high glacier and dumped his body into a deep crevasse, certain it would never be found. He then returned to Michael's camp, stole the rifle and other valuable gear, and walked back to his cabin, the heavy snow covering his tracks and burying the secret of his crime. Elias Vance was charged with 1 count of murder in the first degree and 1 count of robbery. His trial was a somber affair, presenting the jury with the cold, hard facts of the case. The evidence was overwhelming. The confession, the stolen items, and the forensic link between his weapon and the murder. The defense attempted to argue that Vance was mentally incompetent, a man driven mad by years of isolation. But the prosecution painted a clear picture of a calculated, cold-blooded killing. The jury found him guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced him to 99 years in prison, ensuring that the man who had appointed himself the bitter king of a desolate mountain would spend the rest of his life in a small, concrete cell. In the end, the vast and indifferent Alaskan wilderness was not what killed Michael Thorne. He was not a victim of the elements or a tragic accident. He was the victim of a darkness that resides not in nature, but in the human heart. His death was a testament to the terrifying reality that true monsters do not always have claws or fangs. Sometimes they are just lonely, hateful men. The ice of the Chugach Glacier, which was meant to be a cold, permanent tomb, ironically became his final, silent witness. It held the truth in its frozen grasp for 3 long years, patiently waiting for the sun to rise high enough to bring a dark and terrible secret into the light.